Constructive Voices, the podcast for the construction people, with news, views, and expert interviews.
Hi, I'm Steve Randall, and welcome to another of our special podcast episodes featuring the many people that Peter Finn, Pete the Builder, and I spoke to at the Footprint Plus event at the start of June. We learned a lot and discovered some fascinating work that's going on to ensure that the construction industry is part of the greener, more sustainable world that we need as we drive towards carbon net zero. If you can't wait to catch up with all our guests from Footprint Plus, have a listen to our online radio stream where you can hear them all. Just visit constructive-voices.com, don't forget the dash, or ask Alexa to launch Constructive Voices. However you listen, with Constructive Voices, the conversation is building.
Constructive Voices media partner in Ireland and the United Kingdom is Construction Industry News. Since 2002, Construction Industry News has been focused on the very latest projects and developments within the UK and Ireland.
My name's Adrienne Bloch. I've been working in the construction industry for 30 years. Really in three aspects. First of all, for local authorities, head of major projects at Croydon Council. That's back in the 1990s. And then I worked at John Lang Investments, Amy Ferrovial and Lend-Lease, running the PFI division, looking at health and education as well as housing and extra care. In 2010, I left the corporate world and set up Bloch Solutions Limited. I work really in private equity, looking at innovation in the construction industry, but also putting together big tenders and consortium for government contracts and projects. So that could be from frameworks, looking at retrofit frameworks, housing frameworks, and looking at larger scale frameworks for the Department of Education or the Department of Health. So I actually am sort of the glue that brings different people, the investor, the architect, the supply chain, all together for each different type of framework or tender.
Excellent stuff. It always takes a strong woman to bring all those type of things together, so well done. So I just heard you shared a very good presentation there about some very large scale construction. Would you like to develop on that, what we just seen there?
Yeah, and I think it's really great for me because having been head of major projects at Croydon Council that long ago, it's really amazing to see the transformation that modular accommodation is bringing to a place like Croydon. We've always known it's had great transport infrastructure. They always sort of quote how long it takes to get to London. I'd like to think how quick it is to get to Brighton. And yeah, I mean, just being able to build things so quickly, using modular systems that have now really evolved to be much more sustainable is very exciting because it's the only way we're actually going to reach that 300,000 target of new homes every year. So yeah, I'm all for it. I think we have to throw away the old prejudice around modular. Things have moved on and they're moving on rapidly, and this is going to be part of the solution, not necessarily the whole solution going forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. Modular construction certainly has huge advantages, and it's one of the only types of construction where you can actually properly record your carbon footprint, and also it's now being developed into large scale as well as small scale, which is I think where it needed to go to, and I really do feel myself and from hearing other people speaking here today as well, that it certainly is a step in the right direction in terms of the the aim for carbon net zero. So what do you think is coming next? We certainly have made steps in the right direction. Maybe events like this will put momentum behind that. And where do you see it going next?
Yeah, it's really interesting what you were just saying, and I think one of the other things about equality, and when you really look at ESG, is the factory environment is often much easier for women to participate in. So I think it's going to be a real game changer in terms of getting women in construction, which we've been trying to do for years and years. So I think that's probably one of the next steps, and that will creep up on us by default, where people can, particularly if there's factories near their homes, and they can work more of a shift pattern. That's going to be great. Also developing more skills, different types of skills as well, is going to be interesting. I think the next big change really though is going to be around the lifting equipment, the plant and the transportation, and making sure that investment in those green solutions, because that's going to really sort of shift the dial further on the sustainability, the EPC, the BREEAM assessments. So I think there's going to be step change in that direction. And I think, as I said there, the hybrid, the mix and match between modular and traditional is going to happen more and more. I think the thing to look forward to, and really perhaps next year at this conference we can come back to this, will be how easy some of those airtight modules are going to be for planned preventative maintenance. And maybe it would be really good to hear about people who actually, from some of the people, the residents themselves, about how they're finding and whether they see any differences in living in a modular environment versus traditional. So I think that's going to be actual testimonials from occupiers will be really interesting.
Brilliant stuff. Well, as a father of 3 daughters, it's great to hear that there is a future in construction for women in construction, and I'm an absolute adversary of that. I really do think that that's something that has to happen, because we don't have the manpower. We simply don't. We need more bodies in construction, and a woman's perspective is always something that I highly respect, and I think it's something that really needs to be brought into construction more. I really also agree with a lot of the other stuff that you said there as well, in terms of where we are going. So, final question: are we going in the right direction, and are we going fast enough?
Well, I think we are going in the right direction. I think the fact that we now can potentially, we're talking about green mortgages that might be very good from the MMC point of view. I think we need to see those being much more accessible, and actually we need to link green credentials with cheaper products. We really need to incentivize the consumer. I think when the realisation on EPC rating, as I said, for the buy-to-let market is going to sink in, people are going to think very hard about the green credentials of any investments they make on a personal level. I think, are we going fast enough? Probably not, but where I'd like to see, there's many different forms of modular construction, as you know, and you alluded to yourself. And I think we really need to be thinking about repurposing environments in the high street. Sometimes you can put modulars in big spaces like this. You can be much more creative. Rooftop developments as well. So I think planners do need to learn, as well as at the same pace, of what can be done. Even if things are potentially there for 5 or 10 years, they can be done very quickly and can make a big difference, particularly around homelessness, things like extra care that I work in, nursing care, where we've got a huge demand, and where we also need to improve the estate and stock that we have to bring it up to standard. Modular, for example, can be used. You can build a care home very quickly next door to a site, then you can decant residents into an environment where the nursing and the care can be done, and then recant them back in when some of those other retrofit improvements have been done. So I think modular has many, many uses, whether it's long-term or short-term. And if it's short-term, then they can be repurposed elsewhere around the country. So again, they're very sustainable. So I think we need to think much more broadly, and I think we did see that in the COVID pandemics in China itself, where we saw modular hospitals going up very quickly, and we haven't got enough ward space. So I think as a country we need to really embrace it and think about it much more strategically.
From the Footprint Plus event in Brighton, UK, to the global construction industry.
This is Constructive Voices.
My name's David Lewis. I'm the Operations and Finance Director for Ironstone Asset Management. It's the investment advisor to Life Science REIT PLC, which is an entity that was listed on the stock market in November last year. And we are creating space for science. So the concept is that there is a lack of suitable office/lab space in the UK. We are specifically focused on what we call the Golden Triangle, which is between London, Cambridge and Oxford. And obviously that is where the centre of the research into that particular industry is based. And so we're specifically focused on there because we see what's called a genius loci in terms of hospitals and the universities, and specifically where that knowledge is based and where companies are, again, looking for space to grow, essentially.
And this is huge, isn't it? This area, particularly life sciences, is growing in an exponential way.
Yeah.
And I suppose we're taking more notice of it as consumers because of what's happened in the last few years. Everyone wants to know, how life sciences is going to make sure that we live for, as long as we can potentially live.
That's exactly right. There is certainly, as I say, a lack of space associated with this type of business, and we are trying to again identify particular locations in these areas, particularly science parks, where we feel that we can develop the space they need, because it is specialist. That's the thing about it. We must have been offered every single empty Debenhams department store to say, look, life science, yes, it's all new and exciting, but the space needs to be looked at specifically to try and ensure that it can actually meet the requirements of our occupiers. That's absolutely key.
And is that because in life sciences particularly there's kind of an ecosystem that needs to exist, so there need to be certain things around that space?
It's more there is an element of that, particularly because again they like the campus environment, so companies that want to work together, there's that aspect of it all. It's also the buildings themselves, so they also need sufficient room for ventilation, so floor to heat, ceiling heights are very key. And as we are here at Footprint Plus, that sustainability aspect is also quite important to our clients as well, in terms of trying to ensure that they are occupying a building that they believe is of the right standard, that meets their own sustainability and ESG criteria.
And as a real estate investment trust, how does that work for you in terms of ensuring that you're meeting their sustainability criteria that is so important, while also being not exactly able to pick, from anywhere? You've got some restraints on you there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our investors in particular are very keen, and that is becoming more and more apparent, very keen on what our sustainability criteria is. There's going to be some new reporting standards that are coming out next year that we're going to have to meet. They are very keen to understand the buildings that we've invested in. So we've managed to, we only listed in November, but we've managed to secure 6 assets since then. And they're very keen to understand what our EPC ratings are, and then also what potentially we're going to do to get them up to meet the new standards that are coming in. So again, part of that is saying to both our investors and our occupiers that we intend to spend a certain amount of money on, again, improving them. So that can be simple things that is just like putting PV panels on roofs, EV charging points, getting the installation up to scratch. So there's some quick wins that we can achieve relatively quickly. But overall, we need to look at the buildings in its entirety and ensure that we continue to meet, I say, the standards, but also our occupiers' requirements.
And this is obviously, you're in the life sciences area, but this is going to be something that's replicated across the industry, and other REITs will be facing similar challenges to make sure that they're doing what their investors and consumers and their tenants all want.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think it's interesting, this morning's discussion that we had, and people, one of the initial questions were how seriously are people taking it? And I think I was one of the few people saying, put my hand saying very seriously. Most of the people, I think, as myself, are only not just realising it, but actually, as I say, it's becoming more and more apparent that the pressure is coming from lots of different angles across the whole industry. And again, whether it's one of these things where is everyone going to just get to that point and they're doing it for the purposes just because they've got to meet the standards, or how seriously they're taking it. And we only have 8 people on our team, but one of the first people we actually hired was a sustainability director. So that's how important we treat it. again, it will take us time because we've only just acquired these assets to take time to get familiar with the buildings. And again, my purpose for being here is to sort of learn from everybody else and what they're doing in the industry as well. To sort of get where's the needle at? How seriously is everyone taking it? And as I say, at the moment, I get a sense that everyone's here. It's like, okay, so a lot of it at the moment is how are we going to do it? You know, a lot of it's how are we going to measure it? So I think no one has the absolute right answer yet. So I think it is going to be bit by bit, horses for courses. And ultimately, like we sort of said, in 6 or 7 years' time, there will all be this standard, but that will become the baseline. It won't be good enough there. That will just be the pure baseline, and then it'll be okay. What is everybody else doing to try and beat everybody? It will become one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm doing this, you're doing that, and it become, shall we say, the standard, as opposed to at the moment where everyone's just doing that a little bit here and there, is what I sense anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's the sense I've got from talking to people here today. You know, it's a learning curve, isn't it? And everyone's trying to see where they fit into this new way of doing things that everybody knows they're going to have to do, but it's kind of, how are we going to do it? And then, as you say, there will come that point where it's then back to business as usual, where people want to do it better than the competition, and and so it will go on. I mean, this event, obviously, it's the first one that there's been of Footprint Plus. It's a fantastic event, very well attended. Huge names involved, smaller names involved. Everybody looking to find out what they can do to move towards this more sustainable future. I mean, how important was it for you to be here?
Well, I know one of the organisers, so
so you had to be, otherwise you would have been in big trouble.
Yeah. They wouldn't buy me dinner again. No. For me, the importance was that we needed to have a presence here. Again, as a essentially a relatively new company, we're out and about trying to put our name out in the industry and let people know that this is what we're doing. We're the only specialist REIT investing in this particular sector. There are other companies that are doing similar things, but they're not necessarily open to investment by other companies that want some exposure to this particular sector, or investors want exposure to this sector. So in that regard, it's about just ensuring that we can really learn again, and understand what else is out there. And I'll certainly be going back to the office with a whole bunch of different ideas and thoughts to sort of discuss with our asset management team and our sustainability director.
Brilliant. And where can people find out more about you and what you do?
So our website is just www.lifesciencereit.com. Pretty easy, basically. And the whole team are there. You can basically see what assets we've acquired. EPC ratings are on there. And you can see what else we're going to be doing.
This is Constructive Voices.
Hi, I'm Rory Bergen. I'm an architect and a sustainability consultant, and I run a team within HTA Design. We're a multidisciplinary practice, and I specialize in sustainable design, life cycle assessment, energy calculations, carbon footprinting, daylight and sunlight, all of those sustainability issues.
Great stuff. And I heard your talk there earlier. So modular construction was a big part of that. And would you like to discuss that and the role that modular construction has to play in the future of construction? Because I find at this moment we're in a transition from traditional construction into new methods of construction, new types of construction, and obviously much more sustainable and more eco-friendly ways of constructing.
Yeah, I think that we're lucky that we have a big portfolio now of completed projects that were built using this methodology. And we were here today to talk about a piece of research that we've done on 2 recently completed buildings. Research that was done with Cambridge and Napier universities, and which shows that the volumetric construction is about 40 to 45, 50% less energy intensive than traditional construction. So that's really good news on top of all the other benefits. So generally we find off-site construction using full volumetric modular to be about 50% quicker. It's cleaner, it's quieter, It involves less traffic on the site. It's safer. I don't believe in 10 or 12 buildings now we've had a single serious accident on site or in the factory. So, as designers, it's great to see this kind of construction methodology being available to people. We think it's mature. We think it's technically safe and ready for wider adoption.
Absolutely, so good to hear that projects are finished. I was speaking to Nick earlier on as well from Toy Construction. I know that he's involved or was involved in that project with you as well. And to hear that to hear the projects are finished and the research has been done on the finished product is great to hear, because then that research can be an evidence, I suppose the best way to put it, can be used going forward, and make sure that the push towards that type of construction is valid and is more accepted. You've listed off like so many positive reasons why modular construction is the way forward. For me, it also will help resolve one of the biggest issues that we have, which is a labour force or manpower, or generally people available to do the work. And I think that could help this going forward. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think that, and again, there's probably not enough research on this, but so construction companies tell us that labour force on sites are about 40% productive. So they spend about 40% of their time actually working, doing stuff. What they're doing for the rest of the time, I'm not going to comment on. But factory workers generally are about 80% productive because they're in a managed environment. Their tools are beside them. The work kind of comes to them. They don't need to go to the work. They don't spend their mornings driving around the M25, which is what happens in London. Many of the workers, we understand, have bought houses near the factory. They started out as traditional construction workers and then moved to the factory and then bought houses nearby. A lot of them cycle to work. So the kind of benefits for them are immense. As well as the fact that we think that this ends up reducing road trips by about 80%. So what you have in a finished module is you have the painting is done, the plumbing is done, the carpet is there. In student accommodation, the bed is in the room as well. The wash basin is in, the tiles are on the wall, etc., etc. So all that work, all that effort happens in the factory. So all those people don't have to come to site. So we have extraordinarily few people on site, like 20, 30 people building big, big projects. But there's 200 of them in the factory. So you could easily argue so that those 200 are probably replacing 400 traditional workers and then replacing thousands of trips every day to building sites that aren't needed anymore. So yes, I think it's definitely the future. I think there's still a long way to go. We're still, there's not much automation going on yet. And automation is difficult because buildings are still site-specific. Each building is still a bit different. So we probably need more clever robots and more clever other systems. But already we can see huge benefits to the workforce in moving into factories.
Excellent stuff. And I would gather from the positivity that I'm hearing from yourself that your designs going forward will be mainly guided towards this type of construction?
So what happens is we work a lot with Tide and Vision, and we've designed and built nearly a dozen projects with them by now, and we're working with other manufacturers as well. But there's still a proportion of our workload where the client doesn't know how they want to build it. So we're still in a situation where some projects are being done this way, and we have a reputation both here in the UK and internationally for doing this type of work. But I would say it's probably half our workload. We'd be happy if it was all of our workload, because our buildings get built about twice as quickly as they do in traditional contracting. And as I said in the conference, we often end up in, let's say, minor disputes with contractors when we finish traditional contracting projects. That has never happened on a manufactured project. And it's partly because you work together very closely. It's a very collaborative process. And when you finish the building, it's a brilliant result for everybody, and everybody goes away happy.
Have you found the networking, and have you found meeting and collaborating with so many people with the same vision to be a positive experience? And I know certainly I am gaining an awful lot of positivity about the end result of trying to get to the net carbon zero. Would you share that opinion?
I think we need to share knowledge and expertise. We need to be collaborative in the industry, and opportunities like this where we can get together, share knowledge, share ideas, are beneficial, hugely beneficial. This conference is quite close to London, so it's easy for the London market to get here. Brighton's a lovely venue, I hope this conference is a success, and I hope it's back next year.
Constructive Voices.
Live at Footprint Plus.
Hi, I'm Justin Guest. I have spent about the last 25 years working in climate change and carbon trading. Started in the late 90s, right after the Kyoto Protocol was initially signed, and started working around technical consulting and helping kind of develop and structure carbon offsetting projects, often in the developing world, helping work out how do you quantify, how do you calculate carbon emission reductions, and how do you, what's the process that you step through really by to actually formalise getting that carbon credit.
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of carbon offsetting, I think, is really interesting, because we talk a lot. I mean, it's become sort of part of our everyday language, talking about net zero, and we almost forget that net thing reflects that we're not going to get to a situation where no carbon emissions happen anywhere. That is going to happen, but offsetting that by finding ways that we can have developments or do other things, other activities that will offset the carbon that's used elsewhere is the way to get net zero.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's really important, though, to remember that your starting point has to be to reduce your own emissions first, and offsetting is always the last tool that you go to. I think there's a lot of concern, particularly among NGOs, that the lazy route to take is you go straight to offsetting, and there's a lot of challenge around that, and quite rightly so. But offsetting is absolutely a legitimate strategy when it's done right, and I think maybe one of the things we might touch on here is what does done right actually mean, because credibility around offsetting is really important. You can't just kind of reduce a ton of emissions and then claim you've reduced it and then sell that and monetize it and then expect to have any credibility around it. I think, and there have been a lot of instances, some very interesting high-profile examples recently in financial markets of people trading and selling carbon credits, often through boiler room scams, to pensioners, and pensioners investing tens of thousands of pounds in things they just don't understand, and realising there's nothing behind them of any real value. And I think the credibility is probably one of the key things around offsets that you really need to think very hard about when you're developing an offsetting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on the financial markets thing, and I mean, the financial markets will find a market somewhere in anything that it comes across, and obviously the carbon credit market is a growing market, but also there's increasing scrutiny of not just the financial markets and the way that those companies are operating. The term greenwashing is thrown around a lot in these sort of situations, and as you say, just trading your carbon credits is not the right way to go. It needs to be about looking at how you can actively reduce your carbon, and to the extent that maybe you can't, you then look at genuine projects where you can offset that carbon emission.
Yeah, that's right, and I think there's a process you have to step through, really, that has you trying to understand what your emissions profile is to start with. You really have to understand, where do your emissions come from? Are they embodied emissions in the buildings that you're producing? Is it through the use of a building or a particular item, or is it, as we talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So scope 1 are the emissions that you can control, that you are effectively burning gas in a boiler for heating or hot water, etc. Scope 2, electricity from a grid where effectively those emissions are being created somewhere else, but you're the primary cause of the demand for that. Scope 3, obviously, thinking about if you're IKEA, Scope 3 would be very much the people who drive to your stores burning fuel in their cars. So thinking about what can you take responsibility for, and understanding what can you then, once you know what your emissions profile is, what are the technical options for reducing those emissions? Can you, if you're a primary developer, we're here at a buildings and construction type conference, can you build better buildings that will allow you to have a lower emissions profile as you go forward? Can you use low carbon cement and steel in your buildings? And if you can't, if those technical options are not available to you, well, that's when you then fall back and say, well, okay, I can reduce X by doing these kind of measures, but actually I've still got this gap. And I've got this gap to get to in the next 5 or 10 years. How am I going to do that? And that's potentially where offsetting comes in.
And you mentioned developing nations. I mean, is it the case that a company in a developed country that has managed to offset its emissions, that can then benefit developing countries?
Well, that's a very good question, actually, because originally one of the largest kind of carbon credit producing standards, should we say, was the Clean Development Mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol, which ran between kind of 2008 and 2012. And these Clean Development Mechanism projects, CDM projects as they're known, were one of the reasons why they were actually accepted in that international framework in the first place when the Kyoto Protocol was signed, was very much because they were seen as a method of moving both capital, cash, money and technology to the developing south. And arguably you can look at how successful that has actually been. And carbon credits are not the only thing that drive development, of course, but if you look at China, for example, when I first started working in carbon credits in the late 90s, there were like 2 wind farms in China, and now there are 2,000. They're arguably the world's biggest wind producer. So, carbon crediting has been a part of that success. Not all of it, but there are also technologies where carbon credits make such a material difference that you just simply wouldn't do them otherwise. So, a very good example of that are some industrial projects that they don't rank very high on the social scale, but they're absolutely what we call additional. You just wouldn't have done this without carbon crediting. So the replacement gases for ozone depleting substances, so the gas is called HFC, hydrofluorocarbons, displays chlorofluorocarbons, which are the ozone depleting gases. But as part of that production of HFC, you have byproducts that are of no value and at the moment are often vented to atmosphere. They have a tremendous global warming impact. I mean, tens of thousands of times, what 1 ton of carbon dioxide will do. And there are industrial processes to capture that and destroy that gas. And they are actually very much those kind of additional kind of activities that you want to see. That would not have happened without a carbon crediting regime. The problem with them that a lot of people would see, especially the NGOs, is they don't have that social kind of impact that a lot of, if you're a small-scale cook stove developer, for example, in Africa, that would bring. So you've got challenges in looking at the different kinds of credits as well, when you're looking at offset strategies to what kind of credit do you want? Do you mind where it comes from? Do you just want cheap carbon credits, and that maybe you go to an HS23 project, or you go to a landfill gas project in Southeast Asia or a wind farm in China? Or do you want really high social attributes to your project? So so, excuse me, in that instance you would go to very high quality cook stove projects in Africa where they have really close social, human kind of benefits that you can tangibly touch and see.
And how good is the measurement of this? Because that's, do we have a standardization now across the world, or are we moving towards that where we can be absolutely sure what the carbon emissions are and what the offsetting is providing in return?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's around confidence again. That's around the standards that we use, excuse me, and the processes that we use to quantify emission reductions. The Clean Development Mechanism was really interesting when it developed in the early 2000s because there were no methodologies, there were no kind of cookbook recipes for developing a carbon project. those emerged over time, and the CDM did a lot of good in terms of putting a lot of those methodologies up there. And some quite rigorous and robust methodologies. Defining one of the biggest problems you've got really, you separate it out into two separate areas. You've got additionality, which is the concept of would this have happened in the first place, and then you've got the quantification process, the validation and the verification, and what you're asking about specifically is that latter bit, but that first bit is probably one of the big bits that we have to wrestle with around credibility. It gets very hard to notionally say, if I'm developing a wind farm, whether the carbon credits are the tipping point that made it financially viable. We touched on the HSC 23 example as being something that was absolutely additional. That would not have happened without carbon credits. Simply wouldn't have been any reason for anybody to do it. It's a cost. There's no law, there's no regulation. Why would I do it? Additionality in that case is really transparent. If you look at a wind farm now in China where you've got 2,000 of them and it's fairly standard, is the next Chinese wind farm that you're going to build additional from a carbon trading perspective? And so you've got to test that quite rigorously. And I think some of those tools still need a bit of work. I think there are still really good examples that are really easy to point to and go, those are additional. They just are. You can demonstrate it and you can almost feel it in a way. And there are others where it would be challenged. So I think there's definitely work to be done around that. On the quantification side, actually measuring your emission reduction, I think we've got some really good kind of processes and standards by which we all work to that are pretty transparent, where external verifiers and validators can come in. The groups that will do, certification around building performance, for example, TUV, Det Norsk Veritas, DNV, those kind of groups that you would turn to for certification for all sorts of things around ISO, all those kind of things. They're doing that in carbon as well. So I think we can be really comfortable around a lot of the mitigation projects and the verification around quantification there. It gets a bit more challenging around removals, so the forestry projects that some of the people we were on that panel talking about might come up with. So when you're planting trees or you're conserving an area of land, there are some really interesting questions still, I think, about the way that you quantify emission reductions there. I think we're getting there. It's not quite 100% there in all cases, but I think we do have a good enough base to work from that. In that instance, you can have some kind of comfort that if you're buying a carbon credit from a credible buyer and a credible producer using a standard that's internationally recognised, which is really important, you can take some comfort that actually you've done it right and this is a real carbon credit.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, you said we're getting there, and I think that's kind of a big sort of takeaway from the Footprint Plus event, that we are getting there. It's a case of we don't have all the solutions, but there are a lot of people at this event who have part of the solution. Mm-hmm. And when you start to piece those together, the puzzle becomes less of a challenge, and you can start to see how we can move towards the net zero future that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, in 2000, when we first started developing carbon emission projects, there were no standards, there were no verifiers, there were no validators, there were no methodologies for quantification. It takes time to develop those processes and those skills and that knowledge. And that's exactly the same kind of thing that you probably see with the whole net zero agenda. A lot of people today are confronted by this massive complex issue, which is net zero. How do I engage with that? And that's a real challenge, particularly because a lot of the guidance that's been developed, quite rightly, is focusing on larger businesses. So if you look at the kind of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is an international approach to setting a science-based target to net zero, it focuses on large businesses, and that's fine if you're a BP of this world. But if you're a small you're Haringey Borough Council, I'm a small medium-sized enterprise. How do I engage with that? And there isn't yet a process that is, I think, recognised and easy to access for those groups to do that piece of work. So a lot of people are, at this conference here, I just had one conversation there with somebody saying, I've got a lot of consultants trying to help me, but we're still feeling our way through this. How do we do this? And a lot of learning is occurring. But what will happen over time is, you break it down into small enough problems, you deal with every small problem as a small problem, not as the whole thing in its entirety, you will slowly start to build that knowledge base, and those kind of processes like the Science-Based Targets Initiative will start to evolve that will allow engagement from small and medium-sized enterprises. So again, very much like carbon trading in the early 2000s, you're at a point now where we're just starting to learn how do we set net zero targets. How do we do that in a critical and credible way that allows my business to still have a license to operate and to operate profitably over the next 20 years? And that will take a bit of time, but we will get there because we've done it before in other areas. We'll do it here as well. And there's a huge body of knowledge that the people are tapping into and adapting and taking and making their own in order to help that process move forward.
Well, Justin, it's a fantastic topic. Really, really interesting to see the possibilities that carbon offsetting can bring. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
Well, I don't do a lot of work around carbon these days. I used to do. I do a lot more around plastics these days. But
well, that's a whole different conversation we could have.
And that's one of the reasons why I started doing that, is because it was an area that was very much underserved. And we my partner, my business partner, and I both have 20-year careers in carbon trading and climate. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Justin Guest. If you put in Justin Guest, you'll find me, or Lucy Mortimer's my business partner. But there are a whole group of other people out there with kind of skills and information and knowledge that you're looking for. And increasingly they'll become a lot more apparent to you. They're the kind of service providers that you're already tapping into for the kind of advice that you're asking for around kind of building construction and sustainability.
From the Footprint Plus event in Brighton, UK, to the global construction industry.
This is Constructive Voices.
My name's Romy. I'm Commercial Director for Vestra here in the UK. Vestra is a Norwegian manufacturer of street furniture.
Great stuff. I seen your display across there, some really nice furniture you've got there. And in terms of the connection to sustainability, which is obviously a lot, the main reason why we're all here at Footprint Plus, can you give us the connection there, please?
Yes, we manufacture furniture that's carbon neutral in terms of its production. We have very lengthy warranties to minimise resource use, and we're aiming for carbon zero by 2040. Fully within the business. So we saw Footprint Plus as being a great event to come along and showcase what we do. I think we'll win the prize for the most colourful stand because our furniture is extremely bright, colourful, Scandinavian in aesthetic, but the sustainability aspect for us is probably more important than anything else.
Fair play to you, and you're dead right, your stand is extremely colourful there, some very stylish stuff you've got going on there. Do you want to expand on that and let our listeners know kind of what your range is in terms of, is it do you do industrial, residential? Give us the kind of scope of what your company does.
So our furniture is designed for life on the street, essentially. Mostly it goes outdoors, but we do find it's being specified more and more for interiors. But it's designed and manufactured to cope with extremely challenging conditions. So we've tested it out in Norway in obviously some pretty challenging environments for about 75 years. And mostly it goes out on streets or university campuses, those kinds of places where it's subject to abuse. So it's really important that it's strong, durable, puts up with normal everyday wear and tear. We manufacture a lot of seating, cycle parking, planters, litter bins, those types of elements that you see on streets but probably walk past every day. When they're ours, you might not walk past so easily because they'll probably be bright yellow, but generally it's the kind of furniture that you don't really miss until you realise it's not there because there's nowhere to sit, nowhere to put your rubbish, nowhere to secure your bike.
Very good, very good. So in terms of Footprint Plus itself here, it's obviously a lot of people here together under one roof with very similar way of thinking, and obviously with the sustainability issue and the climate challenge as one of their main focuses. What has it been like to meet so many people here with a very similar way of thinking, and what have you gained from being here?
think we wanted to be here. It's the first event, so we weren't really sure what to expect. But for us, we want to hear from clients and specifiers particularly about what they're looking for, what they need in this space. And in terms of production, we've linked 9 of the UN SDGs into our business strategy. So we're working particularly on an aspect which we call Vision Zero. So we now manufacture only furniture that's designed to last for life. We have fully circular production. We'll take furniture back, strip it down, restore it, send it back out. So for us, it's all about minimising our impact in absolutely everything we do, minimising the use of resources, extending very long warranties so that people will buy once and buy well. That's really our philosophy. And I think it seems that most of the people here understand that, and hopefully some of them want to buy into that in a very meaningful way. So I think we're talking about the theory, but also it's providing opportunities to talk to people about actually furnishing their sites with furniture that will, last forever, and try and lessen all of our impacts.
Excellent stuff, and doing it in a stylish way as well, I have to say. Some really cool and funky designs you've got going on there as well, but also the word I would say is they've got a bit of a timeless feel to them as well, in terms of they will go through the different eras of fashion that come and go. So I suppose just to finish up, it was very nice to talk to you. And do you think that we're going in the right direction when it comes to climate change? And are we going to get to those targets that have been set in the future? I know it's a big question, but what's your own general thoughts on it?
I think we're some way off meeting those targets, genuinely. I think some of us are working in the right way and at the right speed, but there's even we, I think, are quite a way ahead of most people, but there's still a long way to go. I just don't see the movement at the scale and pace that we need to see to hit some of these targets across all of our sector. I think it's absolutely vital that we do, but I think there are major issues to deal with in terms of procurement and involving the right parties at the right times. I think construction is still very much siloed, unfortunately, and we really feel it's time to prove what we can do. So everybody talks about it a lot. You can hear theatres all around here talking about it a lot. Now is the time for action and walking the walk. So that's what we're trying to do in an extremely tiny way in this sector. But I think we have to start proving what's possible and doing it now. Stop talking about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, what you're doing is not a small thing for your company. It's a big thing for your company. And I think it's the accumulation of everybody doing their piece will, get that compound effect of having an end result. So really nice to talk to you. Would you like to just mention where people or our listeners could see some of your beautiful products?
Yeah, we've got products all over the place, certainly all around the UK, everywhere, from Scotland to Ireland to Cornwall. So you'll find them on street corners all over the place. But if you want to see them virtually, obviously Vestra.com, you can find out a lot more about what we do.
This is Constructive Voices.
Philip Steele, Future Technologies Evangelist at Octopus Energy.
Now, energy is a big thing that's come up a lot of times with the people I've been speaking to here at Footprint Plus. It is the bit that a lot of people say is the big challenge in construction, to build those homes and other buildings that are sustainable and are net zero. How does Octopus help?
I think there's a few things that we do, actually. So I'm looking forward to when we get to the Future Home Standard and homes become net zero and they're all electric. Now, the government has set targets of things like 600,000 heat pumps being installed a year by 2028. We're at a cottage industry at the moment, something like 20 or 30,000 that get installed. We've invested in an R&D centre in Slough, a £10 million investment, where we are training 1,000 engineers a year to be able to install heat pumps on people's properties. Because a heat pump it's an electrical generator. It generates energy. We perhaps think of our heating systems as consuming energy, but actually a heat pump is an energy generator. For each kilowatt hour of electricity you put into it, you get 3.5 to 4, even 5 times the amount of heat energy out of it. That's actually really unusual if you think about it. There aren't many other technologies that have got that kind of efficiency gain that they can produce.
Absolutely, and we know that the government are very keen for heat pumps to be part of the future of our homes and our other buildings. In terms of the construction industry, what sort of conversations are you having with developers about these sort of solutions?
One of the initiatives that I'm part of with one of our parent investors, Octopus Investments, and another Octopus business called Octopus Real Estate, is something called the Green Homes Alliance. And that's the panel that we put together where we're inviting property developers to come to us for a lower loan interest rate if they are making homes to the latest, kind of closest they can to the future home standards. So air source heat pumps, solar battery systems, electric vehicle charging points, next level of insulation, triple glazing windows and all the rest of it. So I mean, that's kind of something where several businesses have come together and said, let's try and do something and incentivize property developers to be doing the right thing with these homes now rather than waiting until 2025 when the future home standard comes in.
Now, obviously we're at a situation where we're moving away from fossil fuels, we're moving away from our coal-fired power plants and gas generation as well. Are you confident in how energy production is going forward? Obviously, renewables is a big part of it, but there are some challenges there regarding storage and the timing of when the wind blows and all the rest of it. But are you confident that things are moving in the right direction?
You can read sometimes in the news that people are concerned, will the grid cope when we get to really intermittent and distributed renewable generation? But we're actually nearly there already. We're already at 40% of our energy being generated from wind and solar, and it's happening now, and the grid is coping just fine with that. But I think there's technology that we're developing which will make that work well on the grid as well. So what I was presenting in this session today, I showed some graphs of nuclear generation. There's about half a dozen purple big circles on the map that show nuclear generation. That's really big, flat, stable generation. Gas, it's kind of like 20 or 30 big gas generators across the country. You get to wind and solar and there are hundreds, and they're all small. And actually, as we're standing here in this marquee, we're watching the sun go over, it's nice and warm, and then it kind of gets a bit cooler again. You can feel that intermittency. And actually, that's where the grid will need to be able to cope with that. So some of the technology that we're creating with smart tariffs, smart meter data, and so on, intelligent devices like EV charging, how the heating systems work, how your own home battery system, you can start to see how you can sort of soak up and balance what generation is doing and how the grid is working. And we're proving that technology now because we have hundreds of customers on the Intelligent Octopus tariff, on the Agile tariff, the Go and Go Faster tariff, the Tesla tariff, and so on. We're kind of inventing all these ways of engaging customers with the grid and how energy is generated. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think actually we are solving the problem faster than the problem will grow as more renewable energy gets built on the grid.
And obviously the national grid we all know about and has been with us for as long as I can remember. Certainly we've talked about the national grid. Are we going to see more use of local grids, more use of off-grid solutions?
I think we will. I think, as you get to that kind of distributed renewable generation, we will see more local usage, and we really want to try and drive that. There's a few things we've done recently. So we have a tariff called the Fan Club. We own 2 wind generators, one in South Wales and one in North Yorkshire. And customers who live in the local postcode are getting a discount of either 20% because the wind is blowing or 50% when there's really strong wind. And actually what we've done is customers log into an app that we've provided to them, and they can see all the data. They can see the speed of the wind turbine, how fast it's going. They can see its generation output. They can see the wind speed itself as well, the orientation of which way it's facing, all the weather forecast information. We give customers that data. So they're kind of like really engaged and empowered and saying, that's my wind generator on the hill there, and I can see it's generating 450 kilowatts right now, and I'm getting my 50% discount in this half hour, and I'm going to do the washing, charge the car or whatever. That's local energy working. It's brilliant.
Oh, I mean, that taps in perfectly with the British conversation about the weather is always ongoing, and if you can save money at the same time, you tapped into 2 brilliant things there.
Yeah. I mean, look, suddenly we love the weather.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, this has been a great 3 days here at Footprint Plus. For you, what's your big sort of takeaway?
Actually, what I really like walking around the show is just seeing all of the property developers. And there is, I'm in an energy industry, so I'm looking at the efficiency of the energy that's used, how energy is used, charging cars, electric. But actually, it's really interesting to see all the other things that the property developers are doing. All the building materials, the methods, everything else that makes a net zero home, which I perhaps kind of don't necessarily look at and are fully aware of. So that's what I like about this show, because it is more about that than just the energy.
And where can people find out more about Octopus?
Straightforward on our website, octopus.energy, it's there. And actually find me on Twitter, agile_Phil. I'm active on Twitter and I'll respond to all sorts of Twitter queries, messages and so on. So find us in those two places.
This is Constructive Voices.
And that's all for this episode of Constructive Voices. Please take a moment to share it with others who may find it interesting. Follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes automatically on your favourite podcast app, and rate and review the podcast if you can. You can also listen to the latest episode by saying, Alexa, play Constructive Voices podcast.
Here's Constructive Voices. Here's the latest episode.
And on our website, where there's lots more information too. That's constructive-voices.com. Don't forget the dash. Until next time, thanks for listening. You're really helping us build something.